Well, good morning again, everyone. Chetskwex, Pesya, Kisu Kukinum, Oxmoklik. Good to see everybody. It would be awesome if we could be in person again someday, hopefully. But I'm really honored and excited to introduce this first panel. And I met Mike, I think, up in Fernie, was it Mike, about 5 or 6 years ago, and now I call him my brother from my other mother. And at the time in Fernie, I said, if it was like 200 years ago, I'd be heading south, hightailing it with a bunch of horses, or I'd be strung up on a tree, one or the other. But it was really good. And like I said earlier, we almost become like family when we attend these forums and we get to know each other personally. Mike and Marty and Tony and Monique, we're all going to be talking about traditional knowledge, past, present, and future, use of fire on the land. And if you noticed earlier, Natalie put on up a link that um, we have put together. I think there's like three types of learning video type things. One is called Fire on the Land, and you guys could check that out. It's pretty cool. So, with that, we'll start out with Mike. Good morning, Mike.
Good morning, Michael, from a brother from another mother. Okay, get goed uit zo met zijn pwa. Nu staan ik ook Ninnaa Piiksii. Ook een vaak bij voor jou pakui. Nu staan aan kijken nog eens te oudste Piiksii, nog eens te. Good morning, delegates and fellow panelists, presenters. My Blackfoot name is Chief Bird, the Eagle. Got nothing to do with politics, a very old name. And I actually found a descendant, 1780, that carried this name, Ninnaa Piiksii. And today I want to talk about, I guess, the past of, the traditional knowledge of fire. Let me begin by thunder. Piiksii. Thunder is we know as spirit in our Blackfoot ways. And we even have ceremonies, thunder pipe, the Ninnaapska, medicine pipe bundles. And I heard thunder about 3 weeks ago in February. I think, wow, how times are changing. But I did hear thunder way back in the 70s in January, and I was just a young man. And so that's the signal for the bundle keepers. It's quite a in-depth ceremony all day. So the bundle holders of these sacred bundles, they sponsor these, inviting the elders and the people to sit in the teepee. And so now that some have heard the thunder, they're now preparing. So there might be early bundle opening ceremonies, maybe April, May. Usually they all bunched up May, June, July. But there might be some early ones because of thunder. We respect the thunder. The thunder gives us rain and the lightning. And thunder also through the lightning gives us fire. Put those two things together, how lightning goes. And we all know when we see lightning, during the time there's thunder. And it's kind of like the thunder is warning. Okay, people, lightning is going to follow. It's like a call. And so lightning serves us two ways. Like I say, either continuation of rain or fire. And so since this is we're we're talking about the Crown, Continental, the Kino Fire. And I have friends in the National Park, Waterton, as we know it. We don't really know it by Waterton. And two park officials, I guess, literally saw the lightning across the Continental Divide. And from there it took off. The old people talk about when lightning creates fire, that it's not necessarily a bad thing, that it's a cleansing thing. And it came over the mountains and pretty much burnt everything in its trail. And if we were to study the trees all up and down from Alaska to Mexico, the trees, we will find that there's been other fires every now and then, far back as probably 50,000 years, 20,000 years. And so this is not a new thing when lightning strikes. But the old people would say it's very uncommon for lightning to strike twice in its natural way. Sometimes people say that same tree all by itself by somebody's house gets hit. Well, the circumstances, it's probably the only tree to get hit. But when you take an abundance of forest, alpine, white pine, spruce, all the trees. And so if we were to study the fire, the effects, I went to a dig, and it was very, I guess, confidential. I won't even mention the provincial park. I had to use a ladder. They were showing me, the park people, they were showing me, it wasn't Waterton. A ladder that went this way, then down, and all the digging, how they did a square wall, and they're labeling all the different things. And at the bottom, about this much was ash. We sat around volcano. And here's the interesting part. Below that ash was an old site. And I was very amazed. And so a lot of the Western philosophy, Western science with regards to how old we've been, I don't understand Beringia theory, and a lot of my elders, they've never heard of it, us crossing ice water. Maybe a few tribes did, but I've never heard that in our legendary stories. But going to this site, it's not uncommon fire, volcanoes. And so when lightning hits, it's just a natural way of cleansing. It's a cleansing process that the old people talk about. That there's nothing wrong with it. It's almost like a rebirth of the forest. And so this rebirth rejuvenates in its own natural way the plants, the forests. I was part of an assessment team collecting data on the aspen trees, invasive species plants, and the natural plants. And so we marked it before the fire, Kino fire through Waterton, we pegged the markers pretty deep, and we had about maybe, I'll use the standard, about a foot or 2.5 sticking out. So that way the following year, we could go back and if we need to re-examine and the formula we used. And mind you, we mapped all this out in Waterton. After the fire, when we were allowed to go back in and before COVID, we went to some sites and almost the metals were now 2 to 3 feet, almost a whole foot. The pegs, the steel pegs, through bars there, sticking out. And so there was about a foot of either soil that blew away or burnt. And then it uncovered, some parts it uncovered, and I've witnesses to this. It uncovered some of the natural grasses that succumbed to the invasive plants, different grasses not natural to the mountains. And I was thinking, I always hear, well, a foot of dirt or whatever is like maybe 10,000 years or more. The foot and a half, maybe 2. And I was thinking, wow, as the natural grasses, have they been suppressed that long, whether it's 5 or 10,000 years? Now the fire came back out. A lot of the aspen, and I hear they're the giant weed, you know, trees, they got burnt out. And the natural grasses were able to come out because there was no more shrubs. The aspen weren't soaking all the moisture, what have you. They came back out. At the one site, and we found a buffalo skull facing straight east. And I was called to say a prayer over there. So I put tobacco all around this buffalo skull. I didn't even touch it because out of respect. So I don't know if that skull was a foot deep, half a foot, but regardless, when we went through there, we never saw it. And it was right where we did the aspen, using a circle to count the healthy species, the invasive species, the age with all the rings on the plants and the aspens. And we found that skull. I thought, geez. When I was praying, I closed my eyes and I kind of forgot where I was at. I was outdoors, along the mountains, looking over to the open prairies. And I looked up, and for a split second, I forgot where I was. It's like my mind went back to way back. And so I thought, the fire, look at the way it uncovers. That knowledge, that treasure of the old days, and smaller teepee reams, buffalo jump, other sites that had grown over. And that was a big fire, this Kino. I live about an hour and a half northeast of Pachtumchikimi Waterton. And on the higher hill over here, I could see the orange. The power of fire. And eventually that fall, some of the communities close to that all got evacuated that were in line, and they were able to put it out. When I was able and allowed to kind of take a little drive, you could see right through almost the ghost trees, just white. And I thought about from rodents to fish to flying spirits, four-legged, those that were able to get out, and those that did not make it out. And I don't know if the bird count if it's coming back, but a couple times when I went through there when they're still closed about being allowed to observe, I didn't see a bird. Coming back, maybe just two, but there was nothing. And so lightning caused, or fire caused by lightning has always been there. And so why in our ceremony we honor thunder, power. And our ceremonies are 10,000 years old. And they're still going on, even this year, 2021. There's nothing really modern about our tribal ways, the ancient ways, the old ways in our ceremonies. It's like they're all from way back then. Now let me talk about controlled fire. I asked the elders, Iskotsi, Gistano Grais se pamo. Do we cause a fire? And the elder said, well, two things. We're always careful with fire. And if we're going to do that, we pray that nothing is harmed except whatever the reason to burn something. And they talk about overabundance of sickness like animals, deer, and sometimes the buffalo, to help them out with fresh grass, fresh berries, Saskatoons, or June berries, all the other berries that the animals and plants. And they said, well, how did they put them out? And they said, when the fire started, they prayed to rain. For rain, almost like to be the fireman, to put that fire out. So that way it doesn't keep going on and on and on. They prayed to rain. And the elder said the old people were wise. They were very careful what they burnt, because they didn't want to scare the buffalo too far away, where they'd have to follow them hundreds of miles to get their food source. And they talked about the buffalo never really overgrazed, but when it was drought, hardly any water, sometimes to help those seeds, that fire. And they said a lot of the plains people, they respected fire. And a few didn't start fires, and some did. And so fire is and back then it was used to help out either the earth, the grass, the trees, or the animals. And we're talking 500,000, maybe more years than that, 2,000 and beyond. But when we say controlled, they burnt, as the elders say, they burnt where it was safe to burn. Not just in the flat open space. No, in case other clans way back in there were traveling through before the horse arrived. And they said they would send, and sometimes we underestimate the value and the wisdom of these scouts running out, that it's okay. And the other thing, take for smallpox. Some of the teepees were burned, and when there's no teepee, they burnt that area to get rid of that disease, that pandemic, to kill, as they say, that bad spirit. So fire was also used to kill, chase away the bad spirit. So not are we only going into a natural realm of the physical geography. Now we're going into the metaphysical, as people know it that way, of spirituality, of protection. And I asked them, what happens at the buffalo jumps all over, a lot of in the Plains area, but there's a lot here in Blackfoot territory. And they said, well, the old people talked about it. The buffalo are smart. If they smell death, they're not going to go there. So after a successful hunt, not all the time, they burn just a little portion of that where they harvested the buffalo. That way it didn't give the scent away, even to other animals, the antelope, the moose, the deer, white-tailed muleys, and the buffalo. That way the buffalo would come back, fresh grass, and it'll draw the buffalo back to that new green grass in the spring. After a summer or a fall, because they also respected the calving, like right now, the buffaloes. They didn't want to kill the female buffaloes carrying a calf. They waited, you know. And so the use of fire has always been there. It was for cleansing. It was for getting rid of bad medicine, I'm gonna call it, bad dreams. And let me go into the dream world. Just recently, I had 2 stories, people calling me, we can't visit. They dreamt about fire. And I told them, well, I can only say what the old people told me. They told me when you dream about fire, in the dream world, not necessarily good. Very hard. And look at how many people have died from COVID. The fire in the dream is a message. Pray hard that nothing hits your family, your people. So 2 people, almost a year ago, 10 months ago, I told them it's not good. But my elders taught me sadness is there. And I didn't specifically say death, but sadness. And they knew, they understood what I was talking about. And so when we talk about fire, I talked about, you know, the past and how we use it. And presently, right now, we don't have too many controlled fires of where I live called the flood reserve, Ninnaa. The only ones that do it now is the farmers that come in, permit farmers come in on our reservation, do all the farming, they leave with a whole pocket of money. They try and control their fall stubble, burning it, weeds, pesticides, all those modern things. But it sounds like for a different reason, farmland. There's not too much grassland on the reserve. And to me, I live on the grassland, one of the last remaining big parcels, and the other part is out southwest. The only other people I see doing that is the parks. Control, whatever reason, aspen trees, invasive plants, species, that type of growth, or as they say, old growth. And so with Waterton Keno, people say it's not going to ever be the same. Maybe for 100 years, we see all that. And this is interesting. I brought my wife to a teacher's professional development in Pachtubtsikimi, Waterton, Bayshore Inn. They got a conference center there, little one. And they're doing all their workshops, and this is about 8:30, 9 o'clock. And then I brought my camera, really nice day. And I took a picture. I think I still have it. And it's kind of too big to download, but I'll try and share it. I don't know if you guys can see this.
Yep, we can see it, Mike.
Yeah. And so that was the Red Rock Canyon. It doesn't look like that now. All those trees you just seen, all gone. You could see right to the mountains. And I'll end off with the story, because I could sit here all day for 4 days. I took those pictures end of June. This one, I made only 2 copies with my camera. Nice morning. I try and take pictures either in the morning or in the evening. And I'll be darned. Unless there, and probably other people. That fall, September, August, September was this fire. And I don't know how many took pictures that June, the flowers, leaves are just coming out. And so this picture here is not going to look like that for 100 years. Imagine 100 years. That whole parkway. And I rode a horse this past September. 7.5 hour ride to the mountains, up a mountain. And I saw the first 10 of devastation. You look through the valley. Just white, all the burnt trees. And I don't want to go into that. I had 2 or 3 powerful experiences that I saw. Oh, I just prayed. I just saw something. So fire is to be respected. And as long as it's not intentional, as long as it has to have a reason. And that's what the old people, if you're going to burn something, have a reason. Don't start a fire to hurt other human beings, the arsonists, those kind. And there's a lot of stories on that. So I'll stop there, and I got a lot more to share, but I respect the other presenters' time. I've covered past, present, And in the future, like I said, that to be very controlled. But I also went into the spiritual realm of dreams that we don't talk about, yet it's there. And other tribes, they got their own interpretation when they dream about fire. And I got a lot of relatives from Yakima to South Dakota, very similar, their interpretation and when somebody dreams about fire. And I'll just use the word sometimes sadness, you know. So I'll stop there. I'll put my email on the chat. Don't all write to me at the same time, but I want to thank my brother Mike for inviting me.
Thank you, Mike.
And you know, and I got more to share, but like I say, I want to respect the other elders, their presentation. So thank you very much for listening to what I had said this morning. And again, a lot of elder teachings. And thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Lemlems. Yeah, I saw kind of the similar thing, Mike. I just shared with my breakout group yesterday where our fire control program burnt the Jocko Prairie a few years ago in the fall. And in the springtime, camas came popping up out of the ground where I've never seen it. I mean, I've hunted that area, I've fished, I've camped up there for many, many years, and I never seen camas up there on that prairie until they burnt it. So they're waiting. Our relatives are waiting under the ground just for that perfect time. They want to come out. They want to come out and see us.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
If folks have any questions or anything, just make sure you put them in the chat box, and we'll have a few minutes after this panel to have questions and answers. Thanks again, Mike. Marty, are you ready?
Yes, I am.
Take it away.
Good morning, everyone. I want to say welcome to each and every one of you, delegates, panelists. My name is Marty Williams. I'm from the Ninnaa Nation. I live in a community called Akam, one of 4 Canadian bands north of the Canada-American border. The Ninnaa Nation, our language is an isolate language. For those of you that don't know, our language is not connected to any other language in the world. It's an isolate. Fire. There's many, many different things to think about when I think about fire. My own personal experiences, the things I've learned over the time. We are a nation that, an oral nation where we passed on our knowledge by talking like most of our First Nations people. Our knowledge was passed on verbally. So there's no written documentation about fire that I could go back into a library and look and say this is what really happened, or it's just not there. So yesterday, when the presenters were presenting, I was really intrigued by what the trees had to say. The trees were speaking to us and telling us the story and the history of fire within our respective areas. And it's only been, about 400 years now that the Europeans have been here, but our people here have been here for 10,000 plus years. And fire, when I think about fire, like Mike was saying, our word for thunder is Numa. Numa is thunder. So when I think about fire, I think about the natural laws of our teachings of our people. We have a creation story, and in that creation story, it takes many days to tell, because each and every plant and each and every thing or being was got up and said what they would do for the human beings when the human beings got here. And Ninnaa, thunder, as we know it, is very, very powerful. It's so powerful that when the fires start, but we know as Ninnaa people that the fire is part of a cycle. It brings life. Yes, it looks like it destroys everything, but we know that life is going to come back after that fire has gone through. We live here in the mountains where I'm from, sort of different environment than the prairies. But fire does the same thing that it does out there on the prairies as it does here in the mountains. It reintroduces the nitrates and the phosphates, nutrients back into the soil, so that plant community succession occurs over time. And it has an impact on our food source, our food certainty, especially with our berries up in the mountains and our medicinal plants. I haven't been able to find any real studies of how much of an impact fire has. I haven't seen any written material, but I know from experience. When I used to go up in the mountains with my grandparents, we'd go up there to pick huckleberries and get our medicine plants. And after the fires had gone through in this one particular area where we used to go to pick huckleberries, the huckleberries would come back in abundance. There were so many huckleberries that we were able to pick huckleberries with the bears amongst us, and there was no fear of the bears attacking us because they had so much food to eat, and we were able to live together and work and pick these berries even with the bears around. So we would return to these areas time and time again. I think that fire has that ability to help provide us with food. And I think that's what Ninnaa stood up for and said, this is what I will do for the human beings when the human beings get here, is I will make fire so that new life will grow and there will be food for the human beings. Mike was talking about the buffalo and how they would manage fire so that it wouldn't impact the migration of the buffalo. Our people used to hunt buffalo too. We would go across the mountains to hunt buffalo. But in the 1800s, when the miners and people were moving into this area, the chief at the time, Chief Isidore, knowing that the buffalo were no longer going to be available to our people, bought many cattle. They had lots of horses, lots of cattle. They didn't have the tools to put up hay, so they would burn the ground. They would burn the grasses to help bring the grasses back. Sometimes in the summertime, they would have a fire that would they would burn it off so that new growth would occur sometime in you know, in the late August, so that there would be feed for their horses and their cows to help them through the winter. So using fire as that tool, you know, as a tool to help provide food for the animals. My personal experience with fire, when I was 14 years old, I got on back in 1970, there's this one place here we called Wild Horse, which is east of where I live. It's one of the places where the miners found gold. And for some reason, lightning, you know, people say doesn't strike twice in the same place, but year after year, this one valley always got hit by fire. That was the first time I ever went out firefighting, and I was 14 years old for the province. And I was amazed at how quickly the fire burned up the whole valley. As we stood on one side and we watched the fire take off on the other side. As the morning got warmer and the wind started picking up, and it blows up the side of the mountain. Later on in the 1980s, after 1985, we had many fires in the province. I became a contract firefighter, and I had my own crew. And we went out and we helped suppress the fires. I later became an employee of the province and had a 20-person crew, and our job was to go out and suppress the fires and do mop up. Our values have changed over time. I guess we have different values and different principles from you know, the province. They want to protect the timber, the fiber, but we don't see that timber as much value as it has today. In the past, it was all part of the cycle of life. That fire would come and do its job, and as a result of the fires, we would be able to have more food. So fires occurred throughout our territory, and our people would know where these fires happened and occurred, and they would know that in the future there would be food there. You know, today everybody knows, you know, when there's a fire here that there's mushrooms that start to grow the first year after the fire. I myself and my family and relatives, we participate in the mushroom harvest whenever there's huge fires. And a lot of other people throughout Canada, and they come to our area to pick mushrooms, the morel mushrooms. I was talking about policies and regulations, how the province has made it so that we're always out there fighting these fires, and they spend millions and millions of dollars fighting these fires. And I always question that when our people we looked at the fire as something that was part of a cycle that brings life and plant succession. And it's part of our natural laws. You know, we have these man-made laws, whether they're provincial or federal laws, that where we as human beings go out there and suppress these fires. But for us, it's a natural occurrence. It's something that it's a tool. And part of my story with fire, I want to mention, is on my seventh year of fighting fire, my house got hit by lightning. Not directly, but it got the power pole across the street from my house got hit, and the lightning traveled into my house and started a fire in my house. And being a spiritual person, I took that as a warning that my time as a firefighter had come to an end. And after that fire season, I didn't go back to the BC ministry as a firefighter. After 7 years, that to me was, I thought was a spiritual occurrence for me to heed. After 7 years of firefighting, my crew, you know, it's a very, very dangerous job. In those 7 years, we only had 3 injuries. One guy got a stick in his eye because he didn't have his mask down as his protector. Another guy slipped on a log and got bruised ribs. Another guy sprained his ankle. And it's 3 injuries in 7 years. I thought was huge, especially in this type of work that we were doing. Today here in this community that I live in Akam, a number of years, I think 3 or 4 years ago, we had an incident where some of our wells were when they were put in, the wellheads were below the ground, so we hired a welder to come in and weld the pipes so that they would be above ground and wouldn't be subject to mice falling into the wells or any other kind of contamination. And he didn't have any water on site, even though he's working on a well. This welder caused a fire. But our community, we do what we call urban interface fire management. We have a crew that goes around and, or had a crew a number of years ago that went around and did a lot of urban interface work where burning the grasses, knocking down trees that were fairly close to the homes, delimbing them, taking off the lower branches. So when this fire took off, we didn't lose any houses, which was quite amazing. It was a hot summer day, and that wind picked up and it blew that fire in different directions. But amazingly, it went around the houses. So like I said, we didn't lose any homes. But sad to say, another First Nations community here in BC, up around Kamloops, they lost 35 houses. And I don't know the circumstances if they had an urban interface plan, or I would think not if they lost 35 houses. It's a huge loss to the community. today our people still do control, do burning the grass around our house. I just did that around here, around my place with my neighbors' help. And those types of activities, we ask that the community members get help from their neighbors, their relatives, whenever they're doing any controlled burning. Over the years, while I was working with the Ministry of Forests, I was involved in many controlled burns. We had a few of them escape, but at the end of the day, it was all for the better. As a tool, I think there needs to be more controlled burns. I have a concern in the Cranbrook area. It's fully forested on the south side of the city. And I think they've been very lucky that they haven't had any major fires like some of the other cities around what has happened up in Fort McMurray and even other areas in BC. I was involved in a project many years ago where we're clearing a fire break south of Cranbrook. It was 50 meter wide. I think a crew from the Ninnaa Nation, we were in there clearing a 50-foot swath through the forest, which would act as a fire break should a fire come from the south. But when I drive by there now, that it's all overgrown again and people have moved into the area. It has been logged, so I'm hoping that the logging they did, that should a fire occur, that would act as a fire break and not get into the town itself. I want to say thank you to all the people that were presenting yesterday. I learned a lot. I want to say thank you to Lori Daniels. She had a good, excellent pronunciation of Yakit Aknukleet. It's Tobacco Plains. It's one of our communities in the south, down by the border. And somebody mentioned Mark Hall yesterday, that he was one of my teachers when I was taking a integrated resource management course. It's interesting to hear the fire history, that the stories that these trees tell about fire activity from the 1400s all the way through to the 1700s, and how fire was part of the cycle, and it continues to be a part of the cycle. And I think some of these times that some of these fires should be allowed to just do its job, do its thing. When I travel around my homeland here, I see lots of places, many of these places where there's totally overgrown with trees and nothing growing underneath. Another thing that was interesting was talk about the salmon. Yes, the Grand Coulee Dam was built in the 30s and it impacted the migration of salmon to our territory. The Columbia Lake is the headwaters of the Columbia River, which is lies about 45 minutes from where I live. Our people talked about how the salmon, how many salmon would make it this far. It's a 1,700 kilometer trip from the ocean to where I live, and how the salmon were part of the were used by animals and brought into the forest where they fertilized the forests. That was an interesting comment. And my dad used to talk, my dad was born in 1918, and he used to talk about how he'd traveled this country and they were on horseback and there would be no fences. Now today we see lots of private property, lots of fences up. And it's hard for us to try and use fire as a tool when there's so many concerns from the public. The airport is built on reservation land right here in Cranbrook. So whenever we have a fire, we have to take into consideration the impact it's going to have on the flights. I think I'll just leave it at that for now. Like I said, it's a fire. We don't have too much documentation. A lot of the history has been lost because of the loss of membership through residential school, alcoholism, drug abuse. All has had an impact on our people. And whenever an elder passes, we just had one of our elders pass about a month ago, and she was 90, I think she was 96 years old. One of the last elders that had reached that age. So, you know, not having the documentation, I'm glad that the trees are able to provide us with some history of fire within Amakastanuka and fire within the mountains here. We've had some huge fires and I think that's going to continue to happen into the future because of the cycles being broken, the water cycle. When they create these dams, I think it has an impact on the winds and how rain is brought back into this environment. Anyways, I'd like to just end with that and say thank you for allowing me to share what I have shared, and I wish the best to each and every one of you and your families. Oh yes, techas.
Thank you, Marty. I always thought about those, you know, when they have those big buckets with the helicopters and they go to the river or the lake and they scoop up all that water. How many fish do they catch in there? And go up there and have a fish fry or something. Thanks. Thank you very much, Marty. And so our next speaker is Tony Harwood. Tony I've known for quite a few years, probably almost since he started working for the tribe here. When was that, Tony? 79?
Yeah, 79.
Yeah, that's the year I graduated from high school. And I went to the police academy that year and came back, and I was a tribal cop, and then I became a game warden, and I knew Tony for that amount of time. So Tony, thank you very much for agreeing to be on part of this panel. So take it away, Tony.
Okay, and thanks, Mike. And I wanted to put you on the spot right away here that you and your brother Jim, from my work with you in the climate committee, that you promised me a big bowl of white bark pine nut soup. So I'll be collecting on that after this presentation.
That's right, huh?
Anyway, well, good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure and an honor for me to be a participant in this forum and to present with Mike and Marty and Monique on this very exciting panel. A little bit of a change here. I'm going to give a management perspective on how to take our programs here down at the Salish and Kootenai Tribal Flathead Nation did with our planning and implementation of traditional ecological knowledge and taking fire to the surface or fire to the land. And my perspective as a fire and forest planner, manager, and burn boss and firefighter. So the land explorers and settlers saw when coming to America was shaped and maintained by a natural role of fire and by tribal presence. Natives shared a deep respect of the land and a long tenure on the land, and traditional fire use practices for over many thousands of years and many tens of thousands of generations. The cultural ecology that we got some information on yesterday was based on a life of hunting, fishing, gathering food plants and medicines in a subsistence lifestyle. No aspect of land stewardship ethic affected ecosystems in America as much as the native use of fire. As was said many times already in this forum, wildfire and a tribal use of fire is based on fire as a natural element in the wheel of life and cycles. And fire was seen as a great gift from the Creator. And right now, I'm going to see how my training did on moving around. And Natalie, am I ready to share the screen and bring some my handful of slides in?
Yep.
Okay, let's see how it goes. Okay, I wanted to start out with a little bit of knowledge. I mean, traditional knowledge comes from all sources for us. And in a little bit, I'll be talking about our fire planning process, forest planning process. But I'd like to start with this picture taken in Missoula, Montana, looking east. It's from the U of M archives in the late 1880s. And it's south of the river in Missoula, Clark Fork River, and it's looking east into the Hellgate Canyon. Now, a lot of folks, you know, when I went to college there, I understood or was told that the name Missoula was a Salish name, but it meant where the five valleys came together. But I learned in working with the tribes that the elders told me that no, this Missoula is a place name. And at that point, they told me how important place names were in an oral tradition for tribes. And the name Missoula stood for place of many bull trout that was across the creek, which is presently in the Rattlesnake area. A lot of place names are some of the oldest words in many tribal languages. And a lot of it talks to different features or events across the landscape. But, you know, some of the names are many thousands of years old. And it's just kind of a roadmap and very important to communicating where good places to collect different plants, medicine plants, the features of the landscape, the plants that occupied those areas. And it also gives you a look into fire behavior and the history or snapshot of fire. Other place names we have around Missoula is you go east about 20 miles to Potomac, and that area is big open hayfields now, but that area was called It's Got Camas. That was one of the greatest collection sites of camas in an area with a high water table and frequent fire where camas was very abundant and an historical site. You go up Lolo Creek and to the Idaho line, and on the Montana side, it's named it does not have salmon, but you get on the Lochsaw side in Idaho, and it's called It's Got Salmon. Other place names that really we pursued in doing our planning. You go northwest of town in the Bob Marshall Wilderness, and Big Prairie was called Little Prairies here and there, and an association to the use of fire by natives. Condon, it's ponderosa pine and lodgepole pine, pretty unique with bitterbrush underneath it. Frequent fire occurrence history of 4 to 5 years, and it's called burned overground. So it's just one of those tools that we'll be talking about and what we used in setting up our traditions. I want to hold this for just a second, but I'm going back in the past as well. I was raised in north central or Montana, and on the Blackfeet Indian Reservation. That's where my dad was raised. And when I was a little kid, first, second grade, my best friend lived across the 40 acre expanse of ground, and I didn't have a grandma, so him and his grandma adopted me. And we used to go to her place, no water, a pretty primitive camp on the Birch Creek. And I think she was Grandma Peppian. And anyway, we'd spend a lot of our summers there swimming and working and helping Grandma. And boy, I'll tell you, she was a storyteller and she was a trickster too. She just teased the hell out of me, and I loved it. But she'd take us out and she introduced me to plants, me and my buddy, blackcurrant, gooseberries, service, chokecherry, and she taught us how to fish the native way. And anything we were out doing in the woods there or out in the prairie, she was telling the story. She was recollecting about what her grandmother had told her about various things. And she sure had that oral tradition. The picture I'm showing right now is from the early 1960s. And this is a lady called Agnes Vanderberg here with the Salish and Kootenai tribes, and up doing the cambium strip with lodgepole pine. I thought this activity was associated with ponderosa pine camas scrapes, but the main thing about Agnes Vanderberg is that in the 1960s and 70s, she decided she was going to be a superstar with oral or with tradition. She was going to make sure that, and she came in and she set up a culture camp east of RLE, Montana, southwest corner of the reservation. And it was a language camp, but she had several dozens of people that were there camping or dropping off just for language and for practices. Go out and do collections, plant identification, all those things. And she did that for almost 30 years on the tribe. And a lot of her students are the folks that are carrying on with our mission school and are carrying on the traditional practices that ended up in our forest and fire management areas. And, she really demonstrated traditional ecological knowledge, traditional fire use practices that were based on keen observations, that were iterative process, passed on a way of knowing to future generations through different oral traditions, stories, songs, and everything else, etc. Okay, when we get into the forest planning, we did a new plan in 2000, or started in the mid-90s actually. And you should understand that it was based on the Indian Self-Determination Act, Public Law 638 from 1975, and the Self-Governance Act in 1994. This was the driver of government, tribal government, that we had BIA programs that were running our natural resources and fire programs, health and education. But it said that if tribes had the ability, they could contract these programs and they could run their own destiny with those practices. So when we went in to do a required 10-year forest management plan, the tribal council says, hey, we're going to do this our own way. Those goals and objectives are ours now. And instead of an old German forestry plan, economic-based plan, we want an ecosystem management plan. And we want to take care of the animals. We want to take care of tribal culture. We want to bring in and be strongly influenced by these various things from the oral traditions or the TEK. And the first thing we did is we went out. We didn't know how to do this, but we learned, had a pretty good learning curve. And this is a picture between Polson, Montana, south part of the lake, to Pablo, where the tribal headquarters is. And you can see that the picture is a very busy picture. It's looking east off of Highway 93. And it shows an area that was dominated by fire. You know, there's at least a dozen, maybe 15 fire scars that occurred from 1910, progressing into this picture taken in 1925. Look at all the edge and patch there, all the diversity. Look what the great gift of fire that the Creator had given us for this hillside. You look down below on this photo point, and there's a picture of a monoculture there. Densification, a big change in the landscape because of a lack of fire and fire exclusion. And we use several of these type of pictures to show different fire regimes, how they've changed with the composition and species composition, encroachment. We actually had a picture of people up in the timberline, that area where the elders said, we can't get up there anymore. The lack of fire, we can't get up there and gather plants. We can't reach the white bark pine. We can't reach the husk that's in the meadows up there, the distal plant. And we use those things and brought them forward with this changing landscape. And we developed our fire regimes with this process, bringing it forward into a fire plan that used an ecosystem management circles. And, you know, with ecosystem management, it was economy, it was biological circle. We changed that to ecology. And then the top one was a social circle for that process. And we changed that to culture. And we greatly extended the cultural circle because of the TEK that we brought in and the use of fire. I mean, this was a very detailed process, but the one thing we wanted to do with this plan and the main basis is that ecosystem restoration and maintenance strategies were fully informed by the natural role of fire, traditional fire use practices, and Western science. We wanted to facilitate a significant reduction of high risk conditions and to promote more program scheduling, an appropriate application through time. Well into the future, we had long range goals, and we wanted to use fire over our Aboriginal landscape. This is a picture of a desired condition. We looked at the historical condition before European settlement. We looked at the present condition and the problems we were having with insects and the disease, lack of fire, encroachment, things like that. And we took those assessments and we brought them forward to develop our desired future condition is based on pre-European type conditions. But anyways, based on you know, our 4 fire regimes, and we have different objectives for silviculture, where we wanted to mimic wildfire where we could, and we want to restore and maintain periodic fire when we could. So I guess the biggest thing with our plan, we've been working with it for 20 years, and I think it's prescribed fire. That's where we made the biggest inroads with bringing in all those dozens of reasons that tribes burn, the cultural committees, the tribal historical preservation organization really has got a good foothold. We work together, we fully engage through NEPA compliance and into our wildland fire plans, our annual operating plans. And we go out there, and what was called since the 1920s was native light burning, especially in our ponderosa pine dry duck fir types, which are common in the West here. We double torch. We go out there with a lot of patience. We want to burn. You can see that we're burning the small saplings and things like that, but we're leaving the ponderosa pine. And like our ancestors, we're burning the cleansing the forest. And we went from just slash burning with our logging harvest programs, and cleaning up the slash to, maybe 500-800 acres a year. And we're doing this light underburning with helicopter, with hand ignition, and we're averaging up over 6,000 acres a year. And we think we got more room, and we're looking at collaborations with our neighbors, Forest Service, state, BLM, the Nature Conservancy. We're paying for some of this burning with our neighbors, and we're collaborating well with that, and we're very happy with that. And also, beside prescribed fire, we've got a big challenge that's occurring with our wildfire management. Actually, we have an advent of climate change conditions on us. We're hydrologically, our forests are too dense. We need fire to clear that areas out with even age resulting conditions. Fire occurrence is greater. Like in 2007, we had our 99th percentile conditions occurred that July, and had 3 mega fires burning on the reservation, multi-jurisdictional fires at one time. We had a 100,000 acre mega fire that season that burned up our cultural area for the Kootenai tribe on our reservation. Those challenges are on us, and we're trying to prepare for that climate change by doing a strategic planning and moving forward with that, and moving, looking at those uncertainties that are occurring. Increased fire occurrence in the 1980s to 2000. We were probably burning an average of 1,200 acres a year, and now we're averaging 300% increase there. Fires are burning hotter, more frequently, and increased fire behavior. The severity damage of our catastrophic fires is greater, and we're losing some land there. So are we getting the job done? We're revising our plan right now. We're looking at the challenges and the barriers that we're up against, and we think that if we can collaborate and partner up and maintain TEK that is maintaining the tribal identity here, if we can overcome those challenges, we've got a long range future that we think we can manage. I want to give an attaboy to the people that planned this forum. So far, it's just been seamless, and I did my presentation, actually built it up, several weeks ago, and it just worked seamlessly into your questions for the end of the day, and I was kind of set back with that. And I got to say that this was a very exciting forum, and looking at continuing on that, and also looking at answering some questions if we get an opportunity later. So thank you for your interest, and And Mike, it's back to you.
Thanks, Tony. Awesome. You made me think about Agnes Vandenberg, and I was telling you a little story about her earlier. But when I was a game warden, this was in the early 70s or mid 70s. I used to stop at her camp up in Valley Creek pretty often and have coffee and whatever. And there was a lot of times where there'd be tourists or Suyapis, non-tribal people stopping in to see how Indians lived or what Indians did. But Agnes and I kind of had an ongoing joke with some of those folks where when they'd come up, she'd have a glass of milk, and we said that that was elk milk, and we had to chase them elk down to get that milk. So they're pretty lucky to have that elk milk from Agnes's camp. Anyway, thanks, Tony. So just so that everybody knows, keep your prayers and thoughts with Monique. Her and her kids are sick, and Monique couldn't make it this morning, but we do have a video that Monique put together for us. So Natalie, if you want to go ahead and start that.
Hey, thanks for having me today. My name is Monique Wynecoop. I am Pit River and Maidu, and living within the ancestral homelands of my children, which are Spokane tribal members. I am a fire ecologist for Northeastern Washington at a Region 6, and also I work for the Northern Rockies Fire Science Network as a fire ecologist and tribal liaison, and help to facilitate tribal engagement within the Rocky Mountain and Northwest regions. So my background's pretty diverse. I have a Master's of Science in Forest, Rangeland, and Fire Sciences from University of Idaho. I also have a Bachelor's of Science in Ecology and Conservation Biology and Fishery Resources, and a minor in American Indian Studies, which focused on treaty rights and tribal water rights. Most of my work, I work closely with our ecology program and also with a lot of monitoring coordination for the Forest Service, and also collaboration and science delivery with other agencies. My passion lies in diversity and helping to develop and share tools and techniques for fostering improved collaboration for better land management. So here's some pictures from some of the work that I've, or some of the recent projects that I've been working on. I do help take students, local students, K through 12, and members of the public into the field and take them to visit burn sites, learn about the monitoring that we do, and help foster a passion for just the ecology of the landscape and the work that's done to help manage it. There's also a lot of work that I've been doing to help annually develop like fire ecology lessons to help deliver the most current science to not just our youth, but also just to the adult public. Just fun ways to interact with them and teach them about just the shifting paradigm about how we're talking about the way that humans have been removed from the landscape and how we're trying to incorporate that human component back in. I've also been involved with the Northern Rockies Fire Science Network in a lot of co-coordination of field trips and workshops, and also in the cohesive strategy workshops, which have been great because they are also, you get to see a lot of different agencies and different tribal agencies share all the cool new things that they're doing in different areas around the United States. Another example of some of the knowledge sharing that I've been able to do with the Northern Rockies Fire Science Network is a TK and Fire biannual newsletter that we just released last year. And we just released the second issue this February. And it's been really successful, and it's constantly changing. And it's just an avenue for people to be able to do shout outs about the different work that's being done related to traditional knowledge in fire and incorporating, human fire back into our management practices. So as you can see, a lot of my work as a fire ecologist isn't just related to fuels or our fire and fuels program and operations, but also there's a lot of other issues that I try to bring to light within our communities, scientific and public. Showing how fire is connected to community resiliency and wellness. How it's a huge component of climate adaptation and successful adaptation with our communities. With the wellness, it has to do with not just like our health when it comes to smoke and risk to our communities from fire, but also our mental and spiritual wellness as well, with how the cultural activities related to burning in our communities, getting in there and doing some of the burning, how that connects back to our community's mental and spiritual health. It's connected to food sovereignty and community safety, as I mentioned before, but also biodiversity, how we need to interact with our, all different specialists to be able to properly manage fire. Water quality, nutrient cycling, soil health, air quality. And right now, I mean, there's just clear paradigm conflicts between the way that our current society views fire and the way that the direction we're going to have to properly manage fire, for our future generations. So the Northern Rockies Fire Science Network and the area that I work in on the Colville National Forest in northeastern Washington is co-served by the Northwest Fire Science Consortium and the Northern Rockies Fire Science Network. And it's a really unique area ecologically and socially. And this area lies within the ancestral homelands, not just northeastern Washington, but the area covered by the Northern Rockies Fire Science Network of many different tribes. And I'm not just speaking about the tribes that are the current reservations, but also the ancestral homelands of the tribes that have been displaced due to multiple treaties that have been made and broken.
The Colville National Forest, where I work, contains the ancestral territories of the Kalispel, the Spokane tribe, and also the Confederated Colville tribes. The ancestral territories of these tribes span far beyond what's known as the current reservation boundaries. It extends all the way into British Columbia, to the Washington coast, down into Oregon, Idaho, and Montana. It's important to learn the history of the local tribes that you're working with and their treaties with the US government, especially the histories of how those treaties have been broken. For the Confederated Colville tribes, the original reservation boundary extended all the way to British Columbia. And by Act of Congress in 1892, what is now known as the North Half was cut off of that reservation. The Confederated Colville tribes still call that section the North Half, and a majority of that original reservation is within the boundaries now of the Colville National Forest. The Confederated Colville tribes retain their treaty rights to hunt and fish and practice other ceremonies and cultural practices within these areas, even though it's not within the reservation boundary. But I also want to make it clear that tribes that don't have treaties with the federal government still have the same rights to be able to practice their cultural practices outside their reservation boundaries. And it's important to recognize that these tribes are going to depend more and more on going outside the reservation boundaries, especially the future generations, in light of climate change. The key to climate adaptation is appropriate collaboration. When I say appropriate collaboration versus cultural appropriation, I'm describing the difference between inviting a group to the table to share in a discussion of how we can better manage the landscape versus inviting a group to the table to collect information for our own means. And that's why I ask, when you're inviting people to the table, communities, tribal or not, it's always important to ask, what is the intent of this project or this research? Who owns the data? And are we asking the right questions? And I'll get more into that. As the Fire and Fuels Monitoring Coordinator on the Colville National Forest, I found myself sitting in a monitoring meeting with other fuels managers, discussing what fuel treatment effectiveness meant and how we can monitor it. I started thinking to myself, how are we affecting the values that are important to my community and to my family's tribe? Values such as fishing, hunting, access to sacred sites, and gathering of medicinal plants. How are we addressing these values and how we're affecting them with our management? And how are we affecting our future generations' access for generations to come? This led to 2 projects with 2 neighboring tribes, the Confederated Colville Tribes and the Spokane Tribe. In 2015, the North Star Fire burned 218,000 acres, a majority of which occurred within the reservation boundary of the Confederated Colville Tribes. In 2016, the Cayuse Mountain and the Carpenter Road fires also ended up burning approximately 50,000 acres, a majority of which occurred on the Spokane Indian Reservation. As part of the Colville National Forest Collaborative Forest Landscape Restoration Program, or CFLRP, I was able to initiate 2 monitoring projects, one with the Confederated Colville Tribes and the other with the Spokane Tribe. And the primary objective was to look at how we can better facilitate adaptive management and manage for social and cultural values for our communities. There were 3 primary objectives for these projects. The first was to determine how tribal communities perceive the effects of our fuels treatments on their cultural practices, such as hunting, fishing, and gathering of cultural plants. The next was to evaluate where tribal communities felt that the Colville National Forest fuels treatments should be done or avoided. The next was to understand the effects of our fuels treatments and wildfire on understory vegetation. For these projects, we utilized an online participatory GIS program that was designed by the Rocky Mountain Research Station and their partners. It's called Mapping Meanings. The program allows users to use a spray can tool to map their values and concerns in a fuzzy way without giving up specific locations of those values. The best part about it is that the tribe owns the rights to the data and must approve any use of the raw data after the project is done. The demographics for these projects varied between the 2 tribes. With the Confederated Colville Tribes, we had 37 tribal participants, ranging in age from college students all the way to elders, many of which currently work for or were retired from natural resource fields with the tribe or the BIA. With the Spokane Tribe, we had 21 participants, a majority of which worked in wildland fire, fuels, forestry, wildlife, and fisheries management. But we really wouldn't have had any participation if it hadn't been for the help and the work and time put into all of this by Chastity Watts, who works with the IRB program for the Confederated Colville Tribes and the BIA, and Vernon Stearns, who works as a fuels program manager for the Spokane Tribe. Before the participants started the PGIS mapping exercise, we had some questions at the beginning that helped get people thinking about the effects of different fuels treatments, such as broadcast burning, understory thinning, and also wildfire on their cultural practices, such as hunting, fishing, gathering of cultural plants, collecting firewood, and OHV, ATV use, etc. The participants then moved on to the mapping questions. There was no limit to how many times they could input an answer, and they used a spray can tool to map the areas that they were concerned about related to the different fuels treatment types. They're also allowed to comment on the mapping that they did to give more detail as to why they chose that spot or the specific techniques they were referring to. The end result is a heat map that shows where to apply treatments or where to avoid. And we ended up using this map for a Sampoil project area. It helped back the decisions of our line officers to move forward with a non-commercial fuels reduction treatment proposed within an inventoried roadless area within the Sampoil project area. The map isn't intended to be used just to go out and propose a project, but more to spark a discussion between the tribe and the Forest Service or any other government agency. It's a talking point that doesn't give away specific locations, but allows people to have a discussion about where values are going to be most impacted by particular treatments. With the map of where to avoid treatments, there was a common theme surrounding sacred areas, historic cultural sites, and riparian zones. And there was a lot of discussion about trust and whether certain practices, fuels reduction practices, would impact these very important cultural resources or natural resources that would affect generations to come. The Spokane Tribe's PGIS map ended up helping them recommend some mechanical thinning and prescribed fire treatments, particularly around the West End community. Some common themes that came up for where to apply treatment was to produce fire breaks or reduce crown fire spread. There was a lot of focus around WUI areas, campgrounds, beach and river access areas, and sacred prayer sites. There was a huge focus on wildlife habitat for hunting. And there was also a lot of discussion about trust that the Spokane Tribal Fire Management Program was protecting their water, cultural, and prayer sites from damage. The map of where to avoid treatments discussed concern for firefighter exposure and health around mines, particularly Midnight Mine in the Blue Creek area. There was also a lot of concern regarding roads from commercial thinning or timber sales, opening up areas to increased OHV and automobile use. They were worried about wildfires burning too hot, damaging timber, firewood, or cultural sites. And there were recommendations to avoid further damage and to allow recovery within wildfire or recently logged areas. The 2015 North Star fire offered a prime opportunity to look at how the understory vegetation responded to wildfire with or without prior broadcast burning or mechanical thinning. At the time that we were working with the Confederated Colville tribes, we had originally intended to look at our fuels reduction treatments and see how we impacted cultural values. When the North Star fire started burning through these fuels treatments that we were originally planning on putting fire-mon plots in, we decided to implement rapid response protocol. In order to do this, we had to be fire qualled, and we had to know how to do all of the stuff that a wildland firefighter has to do every morning, checking in with a division soup, having a firefighter to be a lookout, being current with our red card, and practicing safety. It was really exciting to be able to go out and look at our fuels treatments and to establish some plots while also being a firefighter and being there right next to the hotshot crews while they're getting ready for a burnout operation. My husband was also fighting fire that season, and I was able to steal him away to be my lookout that year because everyone else was busy and he was pretty much obligated to me since he's my husband. So yeah, he's the smiling man in the photo, enjoying pretty much getting some time away collecting data with his wife. We collected data from units that had either been treated with understory thinning and prescribed burning within 10 years prior to the North Star fire burning it, and units that had not been treated less than 10 years prior to the North Star fire burning through. Both units were on similar slope and aspect. What we found was that average species richness had increased in the thinned and burned units post-wildfire. The Shannon-Weiner diversity increased in thinned and burned units post-wildfire. The untreated units saw higher diversity in the post-wildfire paired plots. We also looked at the abundance of commonly known edible and medicinal plants. The point of this monitoring exercise was to show an adaptive management approach that includes community members and tribal members in the entire process. It's not a linear approach. It's not meant to be a one and done type of process, but rather a process that requires you to revisit and discuss what the effects of our fuels treatments are and how we can better conduct them to manage the values of the community. A main takeaway is that trust is key. It's really crucial to take the time to explain the management practices and questions to the participants and to be there for any questions or to walk them through the technology. We found that when we were there interacting with the participants as they were going through the questions and the mapping exercise, they felt more at ease with the program and put more time into their response. Respect is key. Allow participants to take all the time they need to give an adequate response. This is important because they're talking about values that affect their lives, that are important to them, especially with elders who came all the way out to interact with us and to discuss the management practices and what was important to them. They needed the time to be able to get adjusted to the program. That they also needed the time to tell stories, to talk with us, and to build that trust, and to know that we respected their opinion and that this wasn't a waste of their time. We also found that it was valuable to tell the story of why we were doing this project. It took time and effort, and almost every single participant wanted to know, why are we doing this? What is the end product? Why is this important? And will it come back to benefit us in the end? And it's really important to think about this with every single project that we do. Why are we doing this? Why is it important? I don't feel like we should be telling people that this is something that we need to do, that this is just our trust responsibility. When it's more than that, it shows.